Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Thank you all for joining us, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Well, we've been chasing this young man for quite some time. Tommy Ahlquist joins us now. Dr. Ahlquist, thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you, Kevin. Thanks for having me on.
So here we are, the start of the new year. What do you have going on?
Oh, it's been fun. I've settled back into business life, and it's been a very, very busy 6 months. We've got a new partnership with the Alan Ball family, so Ball Ventures Ahlquist, and we're doing a lot of commercial development. As you know, times are really hot right now, probably too hot, so we're kind of always checking ourselves and preparing for a little bit of a slowdown, but a lot of commercial development going on in a new company, and it's growing quickly, and enjoying it very much. So that's a lot what's going on, settling back into my family and back to private life, which has been interesting.
Well, I was going to say, last year at this time, you were on the trail working nonstop without a paycheck, by the way. And here you are now back into the private sector, back into the real world. Let's take a look back on this historic run for governor. You, Brad Little, Raul Labrador. I don't think we'll ever see another race quite like it.
Yeah, it was interesting. I've reflected on it quite a bit. I was back in Washington, D.C. last week and was meeting with some folks there, and it was kind of the first time I've had a chance to be asked questions about the race and getting in. If you remember, when I first got in, it was Russ Fulcher and Brad Little. And at first, got to know Russ pretty well, and that was the race. And then a lot of speculation if Raul would get in, and he ended up jumping in, and it got heated and long, and it was a tough campaign. I think that I was warned before I went in that you can't prepare yourself for a primary election, and that certainly was the case. It's just an experience unlike other parts of your private life. You get exposed. It's kind of mean and nasty, and just the way politics works. I'm not complaining because I certainly was warned that that's what happened, but it was interesting. Probably the best experience for my life and of my life. The tremendous relationships, but also learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about politics and people. So I'll cherish the experience, but also pretty glad that it's over, Kevin. It was a grind for my family. It's an interesting thing to go through, and then losing. I mean, that's the big question. Yeah. You lose an election, and you put everything, your heart and soul into it, and you think you're doing it for the right reasons, and then having to deal with that. That doesn't happen too often when you're in the business world. I mean, you have ups and downs, and things work and don't work. But when you put everything into something and then you lose, that feeling when you lose is a feeling that I'll never forget.
What was that like that night?
It was certainly a possibility going into it that it was an uphill battle. I mean, we were taking on two long-time politicians with big bases around the state, and it was a tough charge, but we believed that we could do it. And going into that night, still, I look at that last week of the campaign, we were all over the state and felt the energy from the other parts of the state. And I think the reflection that night of we got beat soundly in Ada County and Canyon County, and in retrospect, maybe should have spent more time here. Thought that we would do better here, but felt the energy from around the other parts of the state and came home and then lost. And it was interesting. It was kind of like, what have I done? I've let people down. Combination of regret that you maybe didn't do more. And then I think the deeply personal relationships, the people that believed in you, just felt bad that you let people down. And it's a hard thing to do. I probably still haven't dealt with it too much, just because I still have connections with those folks and just still feel so much love and gratitude towards them. It's a hard feeling. I don't know.
Tommy Ahlquist joining us here with insight into the campaign. Looking at his future, looking at the future of the state of Idaho here on KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM with Kevin Miller in the morning. We go back to the world of politics and business. The president is getting an education on that. Your thoughts on how the president is trying to make the political world more streamlined, if you will?
It's so interesting. We're in Idaho, right? We're a little microcosm of what he must experience every day. And I realized just a few weeks into the campaign that a lot of times the truth doesn't matter, right? It just doesn't. They take little things and they blow it up, and people believe what they want to believe, and literally, you've got people that attack you on pretenses that are just false, right? And you kind of get used to it. I can't even imagine at his level. I tell this story a lot. I didn't know what to think. President Trump's personality is, it's different, right? And I think the way he lives his life is different than the way a lot of us do. But as far as his policy and what he's doing for our country and actually doing what he said he would do, I think he's doing a tremendous job. And I can't even imagine the attacks he's under. Two quick stories, just really briefly. During the campaign, I was able to go back to Mar-a-Lago last time this year, and I got to meet with Donald Trump Jr. And what an incredible man and human being. I listened to him, spent time with him, and the next day he gave a talk. And it was the first time he had spoken since he was questioned about his meetings with the Russians. And so it was a lot of media there. They were interested in what he had to say, and he gave an hour-long speech. And the next morning when I woke up and watched what the media wrote about him, it was eye-opening for me, Kevin, because I thought, how on earth is that what they took away from an hour-long speech? They completely left out all of the other things that he talked about our country and his family and what they were doing, and they lasered in on just a few petty points and exploited them. I think that's what they deal with every single day. I will tell you then from last week, I was back in D.C. and I was at a breakfast in the morning, and the table right next to me were a bunch of folks, and the entire time they talked about how they could exploit the president online. And I didn't know I was listening in. I couldn't help. I was right next to him at a table, but for 45 minutes of breakfast, I listened to these three people. I don't know for sure who they were.
Russians, maybe?
They didn't have a Russian accent, but could have. But I thought that's the world they're in, right? Which is just the dirty politics. It's horrible. Right. And so I don't know. I try to look at the results of what President Trump's doing, and focus on that. And then I think you come back to Idaho, which is, it's not national politics, and focus on people and what's best for people. But it's a confusing time right now for sure in this country.
It is. Tommy Ahlquist joining us. Kevin Miller in the morning. KIDO Talk Radio. So back to life on the trail. All of a sudden, you're in this new world. You're away from Ada County, where people know you, they love you. You've got this political base, and then you're going to all parts of the state. You're calling in to my show and other shows from exotic locations. What was the takeaway from that? Just being on the road constantly.
That was the part that I truly loved, and I made some friends that were unbelievable. There's another story I love telling. It was like a week or two before the end of the campaign, so in May, and I was in Buell, Idaho again, and I made some phenomenal friends in Buell. I went back there several times, just like many of these towns around, and I was at a little meet and greet, and a lady that was there for the first time raised her hand and said, "Hey, I kind of like you. It's my first time here, and I'm deciding who to vote for in a couple weeks. But how do we know we can trust you?" And one of the other ladies in the room raised her hand and said, "Good hell, he's been here 10 times. If we can't trust him by now, we never will." That's what happened. I was able to go to these places again and again and again and truly make some friendships that are going to last lifetimes, because there are great people in the state. And I'll tell you, I don't know how many people get the privilege and honor that I had to go around from Bonner's Ferry to Preston again and again and again, meeting with people, listening to them, hearing about their lives, their schools, local city government, their struggles, their challenges, their employment, their companies, over and over again. And it just, in retrospect now, 6 months out, you never would have had that connection with people, with the state, if you wouldn't have done it. So I just feel very grateful for it, and that's what I'll always remember.
Now, we've also remembered that you became quite astute at making videos. And you would be in restaurants, life on the trail, and all of a sudden you'd shoot a video. Again, for someone who's used to the boardrooms and developments, all of a sudden you're hanging out with these millennials, learning to communicate with them, sharing things that for people of our generation, it doesn't come naturally.
It doesn't come naturally. I had one of the other greatest blessings of the campaign was my son-in-law had just graduated with a degree in social media marketing, and he is a brilliant young man. It's going to be interesting to see. He's got a company now that's taking off, but he does social media marketing for companies. And he just graduated. He was courting my daughter and said, "Hey, I'd love to come along on the campaign." And at first it was as a volunteer. But spending literally every day for 2 years with that guy on the road and the things he taught me and the fun we had, and it was the longest prenuptial interview in the history of courtship. But good kid, and yeah, I learned a lot about from him about social media, and I think we really connected with people through social media on the campaign, and it was a great part of the campaign. You know, that's an interesting part of the world now. If you look at the way President Trump communicates through Twitter, I mean, people probably just hate that. But going around all the traditional forms of communication and going flat out with what's on his mind, you know, and you look at the good and bad of social media, the way you're able to connect with people, but also the way you're able to just get stuff out quickly that may not be true. I mean, there's two sides to this, and I think it will continue to be part of how we evolve. If you look at every aspect of American life and how social media has affected that, like look at just my family with my kids, or you look at the way we interact in business, or the way you interact on radio or news, it's all changed so much in the last 10 years since the invent of the iPhone, and now that everyone carries around this device connected, it's just different. And I think as we adapt and change, hopefully we keep the real human qualities where we stay connected as individuals. But social media is here to stay, and we all better figure out how to use it in productive ways. And certainly was part of the campaign.
Well, and you and I are now in the podcasting business.
Yeah, you know, one of the best partners I've had so far. We've done 3 episodes, right? Thank you. You make it easy because you're such a pro. But you know, I think we have our next set of podcasts this week. But thanks for joining me. I think there's a lot of stories to be told. That's the one thing you come away with on the campaign is how do we get these stories out? They're inspiring. I mean, people are inspiring, and so the thought was, okay, you have all these connections. How do you get that out so that more people can experience the goodness that exists in people? And so I think the name of our podcast is Inspire Excellence. And every podcast we release every 2 weeks, we'll have good guests on that are Idaho folks that inspire people. And I think that's the question, you know, at the end of each of our podcasts, we're asking what inspires you, and we're getting a catalog of these stories that are just incredible, Kevin, and I look forward to it. It's going to be a little fun journey doing podcasts, and I think we're together again this week with some amazing guests.
What's it like for you, though, to ask questions as opposed to have people ask?
It's so much better.
Yeah, yes, it is. It's a good life, yeah.
It's a good life, as you know. Yeah, it's fun to ask questions. I think that you learn a lot getting asked a lot of questions, and you know, the art of answering questions. And I think it's been interesting. Some normal folks we have on so far on our podcast are much more transparent and free-flowing in the way they speak, and then you get politicians on, and they understand how to take questions and deflect them and answer what they want to answer. Hopefully we can get to the point and ask people things that matter to them and to the community. But looking forward to letting people inspire others through that medium with you.
More coming up with Dr. Tommy Ahlquist, Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Kevin Miller in the morning, 107.5 FM, 580 AM, KIDO Talk Radio. I think we say that enough. Tommy Ahlquist with us, Dr. Ahlquist. So, you know, we've been talking about the campaign, talking about Inspire Excellence, your podcast that thankfully I get to co-host with you and hang out with you and really share the goodness, if you will. Let's talk a little bit about state government. You ran for governor. You know all the usual suspects. Another season of the legislature. Do people in your community, the business community, outside the lobbyists, really understand what's going on in Boise?
Oh, that is a great question. Because I go back to a few years ago as a businessman here in town, and even as a doctor, and how much did I truly understand about state government? And then how did that change and grow? And then through the campaign, how much do I know now? I wish people were more involved. I wish they understood a little more how important that legislature is. Not only who they elect, but how they influence the process. I think last week we had Mayor Tammy on our podcast, and she said something that really resonated with me, which is people need to get involved because they do make a difference. And I think anyone listening to this today, stay involved. Know who your local legislator is in your area and how to influence them. What's their email? What's their phone number? And connect with them because it does make a difference. And I think for a long time, I was one of the guilty ones that blamed the legislature for everything. And then you get out there in the field and you meet with all of these folks from around the state. They're really good people doing what's best for them. That's the role of state government, though. That was always my pitch,
Right.
and I think Governor Little will do a great job at this. He gets Idaho. He loves Idaho. But when you get outside of Ada County, we're seen as the great state of Ada. I mean, it just is. And it's true. If you look at the population center we have here, the policies that come out, much of rural Idaho is forgotten. We have 44 counties, and many of those counties are so rural and so much public lands and such struggles because they have such little private land to even work with. And we've got to remember that when we do policy work here, that we start rural and come back into our urban centers. And if we don't do that, we're just gonna increase that gap and disparity. Then you have all the challenges. A lot of the challenges we have here are different than rural Idaho. You get into rural Idaho, and it's the opposite. It's not growth. It's people leaving. It's not even having the money to improve schools for safety. It's roads. One of the questions I'd ask everywhere I went, because I interviewed almost every mayor everywhere I went, and said, what are your biggest challenges? And then by the end of interviewing so many of them, I'd ask, how many dollars do you have at the end of your budget cycle to chip seal roads in your city? And a lot of them would just laugh and say, we haven't chip sealed a road in years. Or they'd say 100 linear feet or 200 linear feet. That's how tight budgets are in these smaller towns. So you've got people leaving. You've got a lot of challenges that we just don't face here. And yet you have policies coming out of Ada County a lot of times that are built and put together for urban centers. We just got to be careful as that happens. So people need to get involved with their legislature. I'd say as far as state government goes, if you look at the things the state controls, it's a lot. I mean, ITD.
Right.
We could talk about ITD a lot, but they need to spend our money in a way that makes sense. If you look at the way education runs in our state and higher ed and the way the Board of Education leads, and then how that trickles down to K-12 and higher education in the state, there's just a lot to be done. Again, I think we had a lot of good discussion for 2 years on that campaign trail with Brad. I don't know how many debates and forums we were in. Most of the time, Congressman Labrador wasn't there.
Sure.
But a lot of times it was just me and Brad, and I think there was a lot of great dialogue. And I have all the faith in the world that he loves this state, and he's going to be a great leader and tackle some of our biggest problems.
More coming up with Dr. Tommy Ahlquist next. KIDO Talk Radio, traffic and weather together. Let's get you to work safely and on time. And continuing on here with Dr. Ahlquist, Kevin Miller on KIDO Talk Radio. We take a look at the lieutenant governor, the governor-elect, the governor, the congressman. Any thoughts on getting to know them on the trail?
Sure. I'd love to talk a little bit about it. I'd start with Russ Fulcher. When I started and announced that I wanted to do this, one of the very first calls I got was from Russ. And he came to me and sat down with me and said, hey, listen, we're in this together, and this is kind of hard on your family, and I just want you to know you can always call me.
A competitor.
Wow. Right? And I'll never forget the genuine nature of his visit. And as he left, I thought, that is a good guy. That is a gentleman. And you know what? For Russ Fulcher, through the whole thing, when Raul got in, he got out, and then he, ultimately was elected and will be our new congressman. He was a gentleman the entire time, and that means a lot. What an incredible human being, and I look forward to him leading us and his family, a great family. Brad Little, I'll tell you. You don't know how many times, you wake up at 6:30 in the morning and hit the road, go down to the lobby and get ready to leave, and there was Brad. I mean, a lot of times we were in the same places together. And Brad Little also is a gentleman. I think one of my favorite Brad stories is I went to the Cattlemen's Association meeting in Sun Valley. I mean, this is like a Brad Little family reunion, right? I walk in there, and they're cowboy hats and the family dog and his whole family. But I was invited, and I thought, I'm going to go to this thing. But no matter where I was, no matter what I did, he was a gentleman as well. And I think we were able to maintain that respect for each other on the campaign trail. And always felt that way with Brad throughout. Now, publicly with teams and commercials and what was going on there, kind of a different thing. But and he knows that, and I know that. But I think there's a lot of mutual respect for each other.
Amazing. And New York Times did a piece on how he just, was so organized and made sure that the president didn't play in this. And Brad Little's a friendly guy. I think a lot of people underestimate him. We'll see how that plays out. the state of Idaho has some interesting issues here. A $65 million shortfall. All of a sudden, the projected revenues aren't there. Now, if that happened for you and your business, what would happen?
Well, I always contended we don't spend money well, and I completely, I still believe that. I think the problem with government is government only knows government, and
right.
These guys need our government leaders should spend more time in a private sector with budgets. I always pointed to ITD. I mean, I look at the money that they spend every year, and you hear this from everyone in the private sector that interacts with ITD. They need to spend money like it's their own. So my first would be what I would always say on the campaign trail, which is just let's spend our money better. There's an insatiable appetite to spend our money by government at the federal level and at the state level, and that needs to change. So my first plea to them would be, hey, just because you're short $65 million, look at what you're spending instead of. Now that quickly gets turned on you because then they'll say, oh well, we're underfunded for education, we're underfunded here, we're underfunded there. Well, take a look at the whole thing. If you look at government spending in the state of Idaho, it has gone up dramatically. And you can say, oh, the recession came. Well, it's interesting to me when they tell that story. I always thought this was interesting. You'd always say, well, look at what we did when the recession came. We tightened our belt strap,
right,
and we shaved all this money out of government spending. We did just fine. So then when the belt strap gets loosened and then all of a sudden this taxation happens again, we just got to be careful how we spend our money, and I hope that that's where they look instead of trying to increase taxes.
A quick thought on state government now. Brad Little, would you be willing to work with him? Has he reached out to you?
I absolutely would. I will tell you our family prays for him. I think he is a tremendous human being and leader, and he and Teresa will lead the state very well. And absolutely, anything that he needs from me, I would gladly help in any way.
You haven't heard from him, though.
I have heard from him. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've heard from Brad. He called me, obviously, the night of, and then we've been together a couple of times and went to one of his events. Yeah. And spoke at one of his events, had a little coming out party for him, and he's a good man. And so, it's hard, Kevin. I don't know if you've ever. It's just such a weird thing where you're in a race that's so hot and heavy and contested, and then all at once you lost and it's over. And I've always told people that ask me, they said, well, what are you going to do next? And I said, well, how I handle this will define who I am. And I think that the way that is you do everything you can to help and support the guy that beat you. And hopefully we can make a difference and help anytime he calls or asks. There's certainly, I think, a lot that we can add in healthcare. And
we're coming up on that next.
Yeah, we're in the middle of this, but there's a lot of things that can be done, and hopefully he'll listen to some of those ideas.
More with Dr. Ahlquist next. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. KIDO Talk Radio, Dr. Tommy Ahlquist with us. Kevin Miller in the morning, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. So we've talked a little bit about the past and politics and everything else. Let's get down to bread and butter issues, most notably as your incredible experience as an emergency room doctor. What is wrong? What is right with healthcare?
Big question, Kevin. Before I tell you that, I'm going to go back to about 3 weeks after the election was over. There are I put together some really smart people around the state that were passionate about trying to fix several things, and one of them was healthcare. And a few weeks after the election, I had a meeting up in Coeur d'Alene with those folks, and we sat around a table together. And quite honestly, everyone was kind of sad. They're like, because you have all this energy and you're ready to win and go try to fix things. And then what do you do with that? It's over. It's a zero-sum game. When it's over, no one's asking you to come in and fix it now. You're done.
Right.
And we sat around a table, and the summary of our discussion was this. Government can't solve most things, and most of the time government makes it worse. So what are the ways in the private sector that you can take some of those ideas and go around government and try to make things better? So, in my opinion, I said this on healthcare all along, is once Obamacare passed, there was this idea that these affordable care organizations, that hospitals would solve our problem. That was the problem. So you've watched this happen, and it's not just here. It's been interesting. 2 weeks ago, we flew two consultants in from Boston. These guys are unbelievable closers. These guys are the best of the best. Been in the business for 25 years, and they consult with people that want to try to fix healthcare on a private level. Okay, they came in here, and it was interesting listening to them. It's not just here in Idaho; it's everywhere where hospitals became the solution. What happened? They grew like crazy. They hired every doctor that they could find. They increased their overhead, right? So all along they were telling us, hey, at some point, we're going to be the ones to lower costs. We're going to own everything. We're going to build everything. And then at some point, just trust us. We're going to population manage healthcare and we're going to drop costs. That is not what's happened. Anytime government gets bigger and anytime systems get bigger, they become more inefficient. So what a doctor-patient relationship was years ago, which is pretty simple. You know, I try to keep you healthy. I tell you how to be healthy, and when you get sick, you have access, and I treat you. That's gone now. Now you have huge health systems that are trying to solve problems. So I think that my job now, understanding kind of what's going on, I think there's a tremendous business opportunity to say, okay, what are the ways that we can create competition and transparency for cost and quality and allow people to have access to care that's not in a big system. That's happening all over our country, where doctors are fed up, where patients are fed up. They know it doesn't cost $48,000 for an appendectomy. They know it doesn't cost $52,000 for a hip replacement. And if we can find private sector alternatives that are less expensive, I think the time's now, and I think that's going to happen not only here in the Valley, but around the country.
Where does that money go? Is that all profit?
Well, it goes to feed the beast, right? I mean, if you think about where does all the money go in our government, it feeds this bureaucracy, this big giant thing. Where does it go in healthcare? It feeds. If you look at how many dollars of your premium, Kevin, for you and your family actually hit healthcare, the studies I've looked at are like 21 to 24% actually hit healthcare. The rest goes to this enormous beast that's been created in the middle. So we got to get back to simplifying that and saying, okay, how do we have those dollars actually hit healthcare, and what are the ways all along the way to take out that bureaucracy that's eating up those dollars? There are systems that, I mean, you know, if you look at what's happened just in 15 years, the cost of doing business in healthcare, and everyone will say, well, that's because we have to cover sick people. Baloney. The reason that it's happened is we took what was pretty simple for primary care, and we've made it so expensive people can't afford it. Sure, people are going to get cancer. Sure, cancer treatment is expensive. Or if you're in the ICU, or if you get an illness that's a chronic illness, or you're sick, we need to help those people. You shouldn't go bankrupt over health care. But the problem is we put everyone on the government dole. We've increased the cost of health care to everyone for primary care because it's so hospital-centric, and it's eating away all our dollars. So I think there are private sector solutions, and hopefully I'm involved in a lot of those, and both here in the Valley and nationally, and we're working on that right now. I think it's a tremendous business opportunity.
What about the insurance companies?
So I think the insurance companies have, they're certainly part of this problem, right? But if you think about that industry, they're just reacting and trying to protect themselves, right? So every time new laws pass, they react. How do we make money off this?
Right.
It changes again of how do we make money off it. So it's back and forth, and it's shifting risk back and forth, and they kind of are being jerked around during all this too, but they're part of the problem.
And they're profitable, though.
They're very profitable,
right?
Because just like any other private sector business, the law changes. How do we take advantage of it, right? So they're doing what private companies do. The problem is, here's what I've been saying in healthcare for 10 years. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Right.
Just because you can charge 5 times as much under the law for something doesn't mean you should. Just because you can take advantage of the current law for whatever doesn't mean you should. We need to get back to principles of transparency but I think that will work. If you look at technology now, if you knew how to schedule an appointment and you knew what it cost for you to go see someone, and it was transparent, you're going to flock to that, and that's what I'm betting on.
You know, we go back to it, how we've transformed our health care. It used to be that when you would have a medical procedure, anything, and you as a doctor, this is a fascinating question because most doctors work like 3 days a week now. Now, I know Tommy Ahlquist doesn't work 3 days a week. So just to get a dermatology appointment, it's 2 months out. To go get a wonderful colonoscopy, that's like 3 months out. Now, again, maybe it's too much information on my part, but what the heck is going on?
I didn't think we'd talk about colonoscopies, Kevin, but this is great. Someday I'll tell you the story about mine. It's pretty funny. They give you drugs before and after that, so make sure you have someone with you that's protecting what you say, Kevin.
Okay.
Anytime, listen, back when doctors were connected to patients,
right,
and doctors had a financial responsibility and stewardship. It's stewardship. Think about when back in the day, I've talked to hundreds of physicians in the campaign and since the campaign was over. and they don't feel like they have stewardship for their patients anymore. That is for their health care, but it's also for their finances. Doctors used to be very involved and say, how do I help you, Kevin? But they feel like they have no stewardship anymore financially, and now they've been bought. They're employees. So if you're an employee and you've lost stewardship of your patient, you're going to work as little as you can because you feel like you've lost control. We need to get back to what a physician and patient relationship was when a physician had stewardship over their patients. That stewardship will bring transparency. That stewardship will bring better care. And that stewardship will solve a lot of our problems.
Well, it's fascinating. I have a former doctor of mine that he founded one of these medical groups in town. And one day he just said, I'm out. And I go, you're out? Look at me. It takes a lot to keep me healthy, okay, or to keep me functioning. We'll just say that. And he said, look, when it became about expansion, profits, and not about the patient, he was a partner. He pieced out, and he works for the VA now.
I cannot tell you how many people. Here's the irony of this. You've talked to some people, and they'll say, well, it's all about money for these physicians. It's all about money. Baloney.
Well, working 3 days a week's a good gig, though.
It's a good gig, but if you ask them, what did you go, most of them, what did you go in this for, and what do you think's changed? A lot of them are making the same or more money now, working less, but they'll tell you, I've lost my passion. I've lost my connection. I've lost my stewardship for why I went into this. That has got to be rekindled in America. The other thing we've got going on in Idaho is you're going to have a critical shortage of providers, right? So the other problem that's going on at the same time is the system's all screwed up. It's upside down. It doesn't focus on primary care, and there's too few providers. So a lot of things to be done. But again, going back to my meeting in Coeur d'Alene with my buddies, it's got to come from the private sector. Let's come with transparent solutions that people can see, and let them have an alternative way. Right now, people don't see another way.
All right, we'll put you on the spot here with a minute left in this segment on KIDO Talk Radio. Dr. Tommy Ahlquist with us. Is that happening here in the Treasure Valley right now?
Yeah, that is. There's a few groups that are coming together to say, hey, listen, let's create an alternative to medicine that doesn't make sense, right? Being seen 6 times before you have your blood drawn, bills that you don't know. Just asking the question, what's this going to cost me? If you want to see some surprise or shock, just ask someone, hey, what's it going to cost me to have this done? No one knows.
Right.
We're going to put transparency back in the system in the Valley and allow people to have quality health care that's transparent, and it will change. That pressure will make a difference.
Right, but they're sure happy to get your copay number right away.
Right, that's right. They know that.
Yeah, which, again, is crazy. Coming up much more with Dr. Tommy Ahlquist. Now, if people want to get a hold of you, what can they do?
They can call us. BVA Development is the name of our company, BVADEV.com, and we have our contact number right there. Would love to talk to anyone that has some good ideas or solutions for the private sector.
All right, coming up next, politically, what's the future for Dr. Ahlquist? He's been rumored to run for governor, run for Senate, and we talk about our favorite topic, development, impact fees, and just the wonderful traffic that we have here. Can't wait for that one, can you? All right, more next. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. 107.5 FM, 580 AM, KIDO Talk Radio. Dr. Tommy Ahlquist with us. Okay, let's talk about your new venture. You're back to developing. You've never left developing. You're building a lot. And, quite frankly, you give me a hard time here. I'm the Clint Eastwood guy from Gran Torino.
Yeah, Kevin, I've listened to your show for years, and I love how ornery, and you're kind of like the grumpy old man, right? Clint Eastwood, right. Gran Torino, get off my lawn. That certainly is going on right now, right, in the Treasure Valley. If you look at the number of people moving here, we always kid back and forth, but a lot from California. That's the truth. But a lot of these are good people escaping, the People's Republic of California to come to Idaho, and they love it here. So the question really is, how do we balance and how do we harness the energy that comes with growth while keeping Idaho, and how do we pay for it? So fundamentally, we've got some issues with how you pay for it, right? There's just not many tools. We've talked about this over the years, but you've got to be able to be proactive about how you pay and think about things. A couple of things that I always talk about is, one, public transportation. We're the only state now in the country that doesn't have any state dollars for public transportation. And you know how I feel about taxes. But we also ought to be spending this money
right
where it matters. And you've got to create bus routes and public transportation that's an alternative that's legitimate for people. We've got to do that. I mean, it's irresponsible not to, and right now we don't even really talk about it. Second, we need to talk about is just growth and how to grow in a way that's smart. How do we figure out how to pay for that growth? you'll hear a lot of people, well, growth should pay for growth. If you look at the fees that we have through ACHD, they're the highest fees in the region for development. And so I will challenge anyone that doesn't think that developers are paying fees. I used an example with you last week on our podcast, but we just did a 10,000 square foot building. Our fee for that one building was $120,000 for one building.
Welcome to Meridian. Yes. Yeah.
It almost is incompatible with growth right now. So there's plenty of fees. The question is, how are we spending that money, and how are we planning? But it'll continue to be the question of our time. We live in an amazing place. People love living here. If you look at these urban centers around us, look at Portland and Seattle and California. People are flocking here for a reason, because it's a great place to raise your family, great people, great values, and I think it's going to continue to happen. So rather than whine about it, Kevin, we ought to just have some really good planning, smart growth, and how to manage it.
Do you believe that the growth will continue for the next 5 years? 20 years from now, are we going to look back and say that's when we had the big spike here? You're talking to people all over the country. You know this area. How do you see the growth for the next 3 to 5 years?
So I had a really great presentation by a demographer who showed us what's going on in these urban centers, and I do not think it's going to slow down. It has become completely unaffordable to live in many of the large cities around the country, and those cities are not too far from us. So Boise, as it now sits, is kind of a tertiary market. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you in the last month, I have met with several businesses eyeing Boise to relocate here. And it's interesting. A company that I was with a couple of weeks ago kind of blew my mind, because I thought, oh, my goodness, if they're thinking about that. So what we think about now is a company is going to come here and then hire people from here. And these guys came in and said, no, it's so hot here, and we like it here so much, we're going to transplant a company and transplant people, because it's so much less expensive to do business here, cost of living, compared to Seattle. Start thinking about that for a minute. If they're not only transplanting the company, but the talent along with it, I think we're going to see continued growth. I do think we have an economic slowdown coming very, very soon. I don't know whether it's 6 months, 12 months, or 18 months, but it is coming. It will cycle down, and I think that's a very good thing. I think that all of us and all the listeners, we should all be preparing for that, and we know what these things look like. Hopefully it's not as bad as the last one, but it's coming. And as a government and as local businesses and as families, we just need to be ready for it coming. That will help, because I think it just gets so hot. You got to think back to before the last crash, the crazy stuff that was going on, the nutty stuff that was going on, and it all came coming to a screeching halt. It will slow down soon, and when it does, it's also an opportunity for those that are prepared for that. But it's coming.
Dr. Tommy Ahlquist with us, Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio, traffic and weather together. Good morning, Dave. And continuing on, what about Salt Lake? That's about the closest big city to us. Do we compare favorably with them?
Yeah, it's interesting. So if you look at what's happened in Salt Lake over the last 10 years, the boom down there. Now they've got an interesting problem. They're kind of running out of land in the valley. They've got plenty of universities and kids that want to stay there, and so their talent pool for these new companies it far exceeds ours. But I'm telling you right now, I've met with several companies now that are saying, hey, the Wasatch Front is kind of done, because there's kind of nowhere else to go. It's really expensive now. Their rates are going through the ceiling for cost of living, and they're worried about talent being stolen now back and forth between companies. So they're all eyeing Boise. This is going to be the next big place that people want to relocate companies, because we haven't experienced that boom yet. So I think we need a plan for it, because although we'll have ups and downs in the economy, I do not see any slowdown in growth in the Treasure Valley.
Okay, if you were the czar of transportation, what would be the plan?
So it is not good enough to just have a plan for expansion. We need to know how we're going to pay for it. And I would look inside first and say, how are we spending these dollars? If you look at the budgets, we've got to spend those dollars more effectively. We can't.
Well, look, we spent $150 million or whatever for HP. That's a good return on investment.
That is not a good return on investment. When that happened, we've had this discussion before, and the offer we had in on that place was for about $40 million less from the private sector. The state came in and paid $40 million more. There's example A of misuse or misspending of our funds. Same thing happens on ATD every day. We got to start spending the money more effectively. I'll challenge those guys all day long. I told you this story also. We're doing a little project where the old where the old corn maze is across from St. Luke's. We bought that, and we're doing a development on that. And I've got to do some improvement on I-84 as part of my deal with ITD to do it. And
That's not cheap.
Well, I'm sitting in a meeting with these guys, and I said, hey, we've got some engineers trying to figure out how much it's going to cost, and we're coming up with numbers about here. And the guy, the traffic engineer, laughed at me and said, oh, no. You can't touch I-84 without spending $1 million. And I stopped him and I said, sir, I will spend what it costs and not a penny more. That's the kind of thinking we need to have, instead of saying, oh, no. By the time we load this baby up, we don't touch this thing unless it's $1 million. That mentality is wrong. It's just wrong. Why should that yard of cement or yard of asphalt cost any more on ITD's roads than it does anywhere else? That's what we're talking about, and they've got to start spending our money right. And we need to have plans to fund this. I think that'll be one of the biggest challenges for Governor Little is okay, what's the plan, not only to grow, what's the plan to fund it, and how do we do it where we're not increasing taxes and we're using our tax dollars more effectively?
All right, about a little over a minute left here on KIDO Talk Radio. Are you done running for public office?
Oh, my goodness.
Everybody thinks you're coming back.
I'm not coming back. So here's the deal. I felt very personally inspired, call it what you want, to do this. I struggled with it for a year. We prayed about it. We talked about it as a family. And felt more inspired than I've ever been in my life to do something, and I ran. It was brutal. It was hard. It was also amazing. It was a blessing in my life.
It was a sacrifice.
It was a sacrifice. I'm back now with partners. Can you imagine my business partners where I said, hey, I'm going to go do this? And I'm back with them. I'm back with my family. I'm back doing the things I love doing now, and grateful for the experience. But my team, my guys are listening to this today. If I said I was going to ever even had a thought in my head that I was going to do this, they would be so upset with me. I am loving the private sector life. I also gained, Kevin, one of the things I'll tell you, gained a deep appreciation for those who serve us. Mm-hmm. I think the experience and just being around those people that do sacrifice and the time and effort they put in. So I'm going to put my effort in supporting them, praying for them, helping them in any way I can. We have a great state. Let's keep it that way. But I think my help and my vision will be now in the private sector and understanding how I can help there.
Dr. Tommy Ahlquist, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Great to be on.
You're listening to Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio.